Let's imagine you wake up face down on wet sand. Your cheek is cold, pressed into a mat of shredded seaweed, and somewhere behind you, waves are rolling in, not crashing, just a dull, endless shh. Dawn light is leaking through a wall of fog, turning everything gray and flat. You push yourself up, expecting to hear it before you see it. Gulls, terns, that constant background screaming that every coastline seems to come with. But the sky is empty. No silhouettes circling overhead, no sudden shadows crossing your face, no flapping. Just a blank, pale ceiling and the soft hiss of the ocean. You might think the birds are just sleeping in or hiding on some distant cliff, but what you actually find is much stranger. Something rustles in the grass behind you. Not the quick, nervous flutter of wings, but a deep, heavy shuffling. Then a thump. Another thump. Like someone dropped a sandbag. You turn, and huge shadows are moving between twisted shrubs at the edge of the beach, big shapes parting the waist-high grass. You stand, shells crunching under your feet, the sharp snap of broken fragments way too loud in the silence. The air smells like damp rock and rotting kelp, that sour, salty stink that clings to tide pools and old harbors. A low, booming call rolls out from somewhere up the cliffs, so deep you feel it in your ribs before you really hear it. One of the shadows steps out. It's a bird, technically. Feathers, beak, bird feet. But it's built like a linebacker. Chest like a barrel, neck thick as your arm, legs like a dinosaur that got talked into cosplay as a chicken at the last second. Its wings are small and tight against its sides, more like afterthoughts than actual tools. It stares at you, blinks once, and then just walks past, the ground actually shaking a little with each step. Behind it, another shape hauls itself up a rock. Bright green, hooked beak, careful eyes. A parrot. Except instead of launching into the air, it climbs, claws digging into the stone, wings barely opening at all. It moves like a squirrel that got feathered by mistake. Out on the open sand, something penguin-shaped waddles by with surprising speed, body low, feet churning like it's late for work. It never even looks up. None of them do. And yes, these guys are all real, or at least very real analogs of birds we actually know. See, this island feels like it forgot about the sky. The cliffs echo with booming calls, not shrieks. The bushes twitch with running bodies, not takeoffs. Everything with feathers is grounded, earthbound, almost defiant about it, like flight is an embarrassing phase they've all agreed not to talk about. So you're stuck in the middle of a quiet, foggy beach, surrounded by animals that look perfectly designed to fly, and have collectively decided, nah. You might think this is some weird one-off, a single cursed island where evolution went off the rails. But this is the world of flightless birds. And the unsettling part is that evolution keeps making this exact same decision, over and over, all across the planet. Why would nature keep taking creatures built for the air and dragging them back down to the ground? So, zoom out from that one creepy island and you start to realize it's not alone. Let's imagine a quick world tour. You're in Africa, and an ostrich blows past you like a feathered dinosaur on turbo legs. Cut to Antarctica, and penguins are torpedoing through cold green water, flying underwater with stubby flippers. Jump again, and a kakapo is just waddling through a mossy New Zealand forest at night, looking like an owl that forgot how lift works. And yes, these guys are all real. Add in a reconstruction of a dodo, moa towering over you like a giant feathery camel, cassowaries with murder helmet heads, emus, rheas, even some ducks and rails that just skulk in the undergrowth. You might think you're looking at one strange family that collectively gave up on the sky, but what you actually find is dozens of totally different bird lineages that all made the same bizarre choice. Which brings us to the paradox. Flying is one of the greatest superpowers evolution ever pulled off. You can escape predators, cross oceans, reach food nobody else can touch, migrate away from bad weather, and basically live in 3D, while everyone else is stuck in 2D. So if wings are that good, why do birds keep evolving to throw them away? Why does nature keep taking its best pilot projects and grounding them? Because this isn't a one-time glitch. Biologists have counted flight being lost independently in birds well over 100 separate times. Rails do it on island after island. Parrots did it with the Kakapo. Pigeons did it with the dodo. Even lineages that already look pretty committed to the air, like some ducks, have branches that just stop. See, at this point, it starts to feel less like an accident and more like an evolutionary habit. A kind of recurring pattern where, under the right conditions, wings go from must-have to, too expensive. We could call it the flightless trap. Or maybe grounding syndrome. Once a bird slips into this mode, generation by generation, the wings shrink, the legs get bigger, the breast muscles thin out, and the sky gets farther away. Well, biologists use a less dramatic name. They just talk about the repeated evolution of flightlessness, especially on islands and in places with very few predators. Take a flying bird, drop it onto a remote island with no mammals trying to eat it, plenty of food on the ground, and no need to migrate, and you've set up the perfect test. Does evolution still think wings are worth the bill? So the real question for the rest of this story is, under what exact conditions does evolution decide that flight is a bad deal, and how fast can a sky-filled lineage become permanently earthbound? So before we watch evolution slam the brakes on flight, you need to see just how hard it is to keep a bird in the air in the first place. From a distance, flying looks like a pure win. You dodge predators, you cross oceans, you look incredibly cool doing it. But inside that feathered missile, it's like running a biological furnace on turbo mode. You might think flight is just flap wings, go up. But what you actually find is one of the most expensive ways to move that life has ever invented. To push air down hard enough to lift an entire body, a bird has to pour out energy at a rate that would make a marathon runner cry. Heart pounding, lungs roaring, muscles firing thousands of times a minute just to stay level for a few seconds. Let's imagine you could peel back the feathers and look at the engineering. The skeleton is stripped down like a race car frame, lightweight, hollow bones with internal struts, so they're strong but not heavy. The breastbone is stretched into this giant keel, a vertical blade of bone where absurdly huge chest muscles anchor. Those pectorals can be a third of the bird's whole body mass, just slabs of engine whose only job is to yank the wings down again and again. Behind that, the lungs are not even normal lungs anymore. Birds run a one-way airflow system with extra air sacs ballooning into their body, so fresh oxygen keeps streaming through like a wind tunnel. No in-out dead air like ours. It's constant, high-efficiency breathing, because if the oxygen dips, the whole flying machine stalls, and everything else gets sacrificed to that goal. See, a flying bird's body plan is basically an endless argument with gravity over grams. Skulls are thin. Tails shrink. Organs are compact. Even the feathers are shaped to shave off drag. It's like evolution has them on a permanent crash diet. How light can we make you before you literally fall apart? Now compare that to walking the same distance. Walking is like a car idling through town. Sure, it takes fuel, but it's chill. Flight is flooring it on a racetrack, engine screaming, gas gauge dropping in real time. Per kilometer, a bird in full flapping flight can burn several times the energy it would just strolling or even running on the ground. And yes, these guys are all real. Tiny warblers crossing oceans, shorebirds migrating from the Arctic to the tropics, all basically living paycheck to paycheck on calories. To stay airborne, you usually have to stay small, lean, and constantly foraging. You can't slap on heavy armor, grow thick, tanky legs, or store huge fat reserves without paying a brutal flight penalty. So, what happens if you suddenly remove the bill? No big predators, food right there on the ground, no need to commute across continents. That whole fragile, high-octane flight system stops being sacred. Wings are now negotiable. Legs can start thickening. Bodies can get heavier. And on islands all over the planet, you can watch evolution take that deal again and again. So, let's imagine you pull back from one of those birds taking the no thanks deal on flight, and the camera zooms out. City, coastline, continent, gone. Now you're looking at the whole spinning globe, blue and white, and you start to notice something weird. All the really dramatic flight failures? They're not sprinkled randomly. They're clustering on little green freckles in the middle of huge oceans. Hawaii, New Zealand, Mauritius, tiny Pacific atolls you'd miss if you blinked. You might think these places are just cute vacation spots with nice beaches, but what you actually find is that they're basically evolution's secret underground club. No mammals at the door, no big land predators on the guest list, and birds get VIP access because they're the only ones who can actually fly there. See, if you're a vertebrate trying to reach a remote island, you have 3 options. Swim for days in open ocean, which is a great way to become shark food. Raft on a log, which is optimistic. Or grow wings and just go. Flying birds win that race almost every time. They arrive exhausted but alive, flap onto land, and suddenly they're in a world with empty branches, empty ground, empty everything. No foxes, no cats, no weasels. Sometimes not even snakes. The air is calm, the climate can be pretty mild, and food is just sitting there on the forest floor. And now that brutal rule from earlier flips. The constant need to launch into the air to not die just stops. You still can fly, but you don't have to. And flight, remember, is stupidly expensive. So, generation by generation, island birds start cutting corners. Rails are the classic offenders. They arrive as strong flyers, slim bodies, long wings, nervous energy. A few thousand years later, you're looking at a chunky little ground dweller that barely bothers to flutter. Wings shrink. Breast muscles deflate. Legs get thicker because walking is now the main job. New Zealand takes this and cranks it up. This is the world of parrots that forget they're supposed to be acrobats. The Kakapo's ancestors glided through the canopy. The modern Kakapo waddles through cold, mossy forest at night like a feathery hiking backpack. It's heavy, it's nocturnal, it climbs instead of flies, and yes, these guys are all real. Ducks do it too. On some islands, migratory ducks show up, realize nobody's chasing them, and winter isn't that bad, and just stop leaving. Wings get a little shorter. Bodies get a little heavier. Why burn fuel on giant seasonal road trips when the island buffet is open year-round? And here's the ominous part. Islands don't host 1 or 2 of these stories. Across the planet, they keep rerunning the same experiment. Bring in a flying bird, remove the predators, wait. The wings stay at first, but their purpose quietly drains away. Which sounds like a peaceful deal, until something new finally walks in off the boat. Zuts. So here's where evolution stops feeling random and starts looking like it's hitting copy-paste. You might think every island would invent its own weird bird shape, right? Some with giant glider wings, some with helicopter feathers, maybe one that just rolls everywhere, like a feathery tumbleweed. But what you actually find, over and over, is the same grounded template, quietly loading in the background. This is the world of convergent evolution. Different species, different histories, totally separate family dramas. But when they face similar problems, they keep landing on the same solutions. Like how ancient ichthyosaurs and modern dolphins both ended up as sleek, torpedo-shaped ocean missiles, even though one was a reptile and the other is a mammal. The details are different. The vibe is identical. Now swap the ocean for islands and the torpedoes for birds. Rails, parrots, ducks, cormorants, ibises, even some songbirds that should be flitting around in the canopy like nervous confetti. All of them, in different places and at different times, have done the same strange thing. They moved in with full working wings, and then evolution slowly repossessed the upgrade. And yes, these guys are all real. Pacific rails that turned into tiny sprinting ground birds. A New Zealand parrot, the Kakapo, that looks like an owl, sounds like a squeaky toy, and climbs instead of flies. A Galapagos cormorant with sad, shrunken wings that you could almost mistake for a costume malfunction. None of these lineages started out grounded. They all made themselves that way. Let's imagine you could line them up as silhouettes on a blank screen. On the left, a flightless rail. In the middle, a Kakapo. On the right, a flightless cormorant. Their ancestors flew in totally different ways, with different body plans and lifestyles. But now, the outlines rhyme. Wings are shorter and stubbier. Legs are thicker, more vertical, built to shove a heavy body around all day. The center of mass sinks down. The whole animal reads less airplane and more sturdy little dinosaur trying its best. What's wild is how far apart the labs are. Islands separated by thousands of kilometers. Lineages split by tens of millions of years. No shared genes being passed around. No secret group chat for birds that gave up. And still, the same archetype keeps materializing. Reduced wings, stronger legs, heavier bodies, more terrestrial lifestyles, again and again. So if evolution is supposed to be this giant creativity engine, why does it keep cranking out the same design? What hidden rules are so strong they override all that diversity and drag birds back to the same grounded blueprint? And more importantly, what do they get in return for throwing away the sky? So, if evolution keeps sketching the same grounded blueprint, who's its favorite doodle? It's not the ostrich. It's not the penguin. It's a bird you've probably walked past 100 times without noticing. This is the world of rails. Small, secretive marsh birds that live in reeds and swamps all over the world. On continents, they can fly. Technically. But you might think bird and picture a hawk slicing through the sky. What you actually find with rails is more like flustered potato with wings. They'll fly if they absolutely have to, but they'd really rather sprint through the grass and hope you trip first. That barely good enough flying ability turns out to be their superpower. Let's imagine a storm rolling across the ocean. Most birds either power straight through it or avoid it. Rails get picked up like confetti. A few terrified, slightly soggy birds get blown hundreds of kilometers off course and crash land on some remote island or coral atoll in the middle of nowhere. And yes, these guys are all real. Tiny rails have colonized island chains across the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans this way. They're not strong flyers, but they're just good enough to get accidentally yeeted onto islands that almost nothing else can reach. When the storm clears, you're a rail standing in knee-high grass, surrounded by insects, seeds, maybe crabs, and absolutely no cats, no foxes, no snakes, no land predators at all. See, that's when evolution starts doing the same weird thing on repeat. In this predator-free, food-rich world, flying is suddenly a bad investment. Wings are heavy. Flight muscles guzzle energy. You could spend all that on sprinting, breeding, or getting a little bigger instead. So generation after generation, island rail populations start to change. Wings shrink. Flight muscles deflate. Legs get thicker and more powerful. Bodies get stockier. In evolutionary terms, this can happen fast, sometimes in just a few 100,000 years. You might think this is some rare one-off, but it's practically a franchise. Take the inaccessible island rail in the South Atlantic, the smallest flightless bird on Earth. Genetic studies show its ancestors were normal, flying rails that arrived, settled in, and promptly forgot how to fly. Across the Pacific, we see the same story written over and over in the fossils of extinct island rails. A flying ancestor arrives, the island is safe, and the wings start melting away. Well, here's the part that really breaks your brain. On some islands, humans arrived, predators followed, and those first flightless rails were wiped out. End of story, right? Except later, new flying rails blew in from somewhere else and started the whole process again. Flightless, extinct, replaced, flightless again. It's like the island itself keeps dragging birds through the same script. So what invisible rule is baked into these places that can rewrite evolution not just once, but twice, or more? So, to see that rule in action, you have to zoom way out into the Indian Ocean, to this weird little ring of coral called Aldabra Atoll. Let's imagine you're standing on it. No mountains, no forests, just a low, sun-blasted loop of limestone and sand, barely peeking above the water. No native cats, no foxes, no land mammals at all. Just birds, crabs, and a whole lot of salty wind. It looks peaceful, but it's actually living on a knife edge. Over hundreds of thousands of years, rising seas have drowned Aldabra more than once. The whole atoll has gone under, turned into a shallow lagoon, and then slowly re-emerged as sea levels dropped again. You might think that would wipe the evolutionary slate completely clean, but what you actually find is that evolution keeps trying the same trick, over and over. Enter the rails, small, secretive marsh birds that are surprisingly good at flying long distances when they have to, and surprisingly bad at keeping that ability when they don't. Fossils buried in Aldabra's rock show that, long ago, a flying rail made it out here, probably blown off course in a storm, crash-landed on this predator-free donut of land, and went, "Wait, no one's chasing me." And when nobody's chasing you, wings start to look optional. Over generations, that colonist rail morphed into a distinct, flightless form. Shorter wings, bigger legs, more muscle down low, living its best life, strutting through leaf litter instead of burning calories in the air. This is the world of island evolution cutting costs. Flight is crazy expensive, so if you can ditch it, you do. Then the ocean rose. Aldabra sank. Those first flightless rails, gone. Not hiding. Not waiting. Extinct. End of the line, well, almost. Because when the atoll rose from the waves again, something familiar happened. Another population of related flying rails showed up, colonized the fresh, predator-free land, and started running the same evolutionary software. Within thousands of years, you get a new, flightless Aldabra rail that looks and behaves strikingly like the old one. Same general body plan, same grounded lifestyle, same no-thanks attitude toward the sky. And no, This is not some zombie species coming back from the dead. It's not the exact same bird respawning. It's convergent evolution, twice, in the same place, with the same starting ingredients and the same ecological pressures pushing rails down the same path. Remove mammal predators, add a flat island, give it time, and evolution just shrugs and hits the lose flight button again. See, this is the pattern interrupt. It's not just that birds can lose flight once and call it a day. Under the right conditions, they'll happily do it again, like a predictable response to the island's template. So if one tiny atoll can rerun the same experiment twice, what happens when you scale that up to hundreds of islands and millions of years? So if islands keep rerunning the lose flight experiment, you're left with a really annoying question. When that shift starts, what actually breaks first? Do the wings start shrinking? Or does the bird's brain quietly decide, hey, I'm good down here, and the body just scrambles to keep up? You might think flightlessness begins with some dramatic anatomical failure. Like one day, a rail hatches with tiny useless wings, and boom, problem solved. But what you actually find, especially on islands, is way sneakier. The first thing to change is often behavior. The bird can still fly just fine. It just doesn't bother as much. Let's imagine a small rail lands on a predator-free island. At first, it behaves like a normal rail. Short flights, panicked takeoffs, lots of flapping. But with no cats, no foxes, no giant hawks dropping in from the sky, blasting into the air every time a leaf rustles is just wasted energy. So it starts running more, flying less, foraging longer on the ground where the food is thick and easy. Pretty soon, it's nesting on the ground because trees are optional now. It's sprinting into bushes instead of exploding into the air. It can still fly when it absolutely has to, but that absolutely bar keeps getting higher. And yes, these guys are all real. You can actually find island rails right now that are in this weird halfway zone, reluctant flyers with perfectly serviceable wings they barely use. Once behavior shifts, natural selection quietly rewrites the hardware. Birds that are slightly better at the new ground-heavy lifestyle do better. Stronger legs for sprinting through dense plants, a bit more body mass to ride out cold nights or long dry spells, slightly smaller flight muscles that free up calories because maintaining giant pectorals is like paying rent on a luxury apartment you never visit. Over generations, those tiny advantages stack. Wing bones shorten. The keel on the sternum, where those huge flight muscles used to anchor, shrinks. Feathers that once needed to be perfectly aerodynamic get stubbier, fluffier, better at insulation than at slicing air. Inside the skull, the neural circuitry for rapid 3D aerial maneuvering stops being under such brutal pressure. You don't need fighter jet reflexes if your main move is run into that shrub and freeze. See, by the time you're looking at a fully flightless bird, the loss of flight is baked into everything. Bones, muscles, feathers, brain wiring, even how the chick develops in the egg. But the very first step was often way less dramatic. It was just a bird choosing, moment after moment, not to take off when it didn't absolutely have to. So, if behavior can lead the way like that, what happens when evolution doesn't just give up on flying, but decides to reinvent movement entirely? So, let's imagine evolution does go all in on reinventing movement. You might think you'd get something sleek and efficient, like a penguin torpedo or an ostrich on turbo mode. But what you actually find, on one very specific island, is a giant, moss-colored parrot that looks like it's wearing a cape and forgot how to use it. This is the world of the Kakapo. At night, you're in a New Zealand forest, and the ground suddenly hoots at you. Not a cute chirp. A low, subwoofer boom that you feel in your ribs before you hear it with your ears. Then a chunky, owl-faced parrot waddles out of the undergrowth, climbs a tree like a feathery rock climber, and sort of parachutes down with its useless little wings. And yes, these guys are all real. Before humans showed up, New Zealand was basically an alternate timeline for birds. No native land mammals at all, except a few bats. No foxes, no cats, no weasels sprinting through the ferns. So birds didn't just fly above the ecosystem, they were the ecosystem. Giant browsing moa instead of deer, eagle predators instead of big cats, weird ground parrots instead of rodents. In that world, flying wasn't a life-or-death superpower anymore. It was optional. If you're a parrot on an island with almost no ground threats, why waste the huge energy bill of flapping everywhere when you can walk? The Kakapo slowly traded its air miles for store credit in other departments: thicker bones, a stocky body that can pack on serious fat, and legs that are basically parrot powerlifters. Those legs let it hike ridges, climb high into trees, and wander long distances at night without burning through fuel like a hummingbird. Its whole lifestyle rearranged around that choice. Kakapo move slowly, carefully, like they've got all the time in the world, because for a long time, they actually did. During breeding seasons, males carve out track and bowl arenas on the ground, then sit in little depressions and boom, over and over for hours. The sound rolls through the valleys, advertising. Big, healthy, lots of stored energy right here. Anatomically, you can see the receipt for that trade. Their wings are short and rounded, more decorative cape than aircraft. Inside the chest, the keel bone on the sternum, the anchor point for serious flight muscles, is tiny and reduced. The flight engine is still there in the blueprints, but the factory got downsized. Genetically and taxonomically, though, Kakapo are absolutely parrots, descended from fully flying ancestors that once crossed ocean gaps to even reach New Zealand. And that's where the joke stops being funny. Because when humans, rats, cats, and stoats arrived, the rules that made flight optional vanished almost overnight. A bird built to trust the ground suddenly lived in a world where the ground was the most dangerous place to be. So what happens when a whole global wave of predators meets thousands of years of birds that bet everything on not flying? So this is the awkward part where evolution's big bet gets called. You might think the obvious answer is, well, just start flying again. But what you actually find is that by the time predators show up, the whole body has been remodeled around not flying. The chest muscles have shrunk. The keel on the breastbone is tiny or gone. The wings are shorter. The bones are heavier. Flight isn't on standby. It's been sold for parts. Let's imagine you're a small rail that made it to an empty Pacific island. At first, wings are amazing. You escape storms, hop between patches of forest, dodge the occasional hawk. But on a quiet island with no mammalian predators, flying is overkill. It's one of the most energetically expensive ways to move that any animal has ever invented. If you don't absolutely need it, you're basically burning jet fuel to commute across a parking lot. So, generation after generation, the birds that glide a little less and walk a little more save energy. That freed up energy is huge. It can go into laying more eggs, feeding chicks longer, or just getting bigger. A heavier bird can ride out cold, lean seasons with fat reserves. It can tackle tougher foods with a stronger gut instead of chasing insects all day. And because nothing is trying to eat it, it doesn't have to live in this constant, twitchy, sky-checking panic. See, once you're not paying the monthly subscription for flight, you can invest in upgrades. Flying birds can't really afford thick, sturdy legs for walking long distances, robust digestive systems that can grind up fibrous plants or hard seeds, elaborate ground courtship displays where you boom, dance, and show off, instead of trying to impress mates mid-air. Even long lifespans with slower reproduction become viable when predators are rare, because you're not playing reproduce before something catches you on hard mode. This is the world of the Kakapo in New Zealand, a chunky, nocturnal parrot that traded flight for powerful legs, a huge storage of body fat, and a bizarre booming mating call that can carry for kilometers. It's also the story of penguins, which didn't just drop flight, but retooled their wings into flippers and doubled down on being torpedo-shaped swimmers. On islands and in cold oceans with few land predators, being a grounded tank is actually the winning build. But then the rules flip. Add rats, cats, dogs, or humans, and all those advantages turn inside out. Being big and slow means you can't bolt into the air when something sprints at you. Ground nests full of nutrient-rich eggs become all-you-can-eat buffets for rodents. Long lifespans and slow reproduction are a disaster when you're suddenly losing adults and chicks every year. And evolution isn't planning ahead. It's not thinking, hey, maybe don't delete flight, just in case someone invents boats later. It only ever sees the present. If the island is safe for 1,000 years, the genes that save energy now win, even if they guarantee extinction the moment a new predator steps off a ship. So how do you spot a bird that's currently mid-bet, quietly drifting toward flightlessness while the future loads something nasty just over the horizon? You don't spot it just by looking for lazy flappers. To see a bird that's really walking away from flight, you have to go under the feathers and into the hardware, the skeleton and the muscles bolted onto it. You might think a flightless bird is just a regular bird that stopped trying. Wings still there, brain still there, just vibes. But what you actually find is a body that's been remodeled like a house that used to have a second floor and now is a single-story bunker. The whole frame has been rebalanced for life on the ground. Let's imagine you grab a classic flying bird skeleton in one hand and an ostrich skeleton in the other. On the flyer, the breastbone, or sternum, has this huge blade sticking down from it called the keel. That's the anchor for the giant flight muscles that power the downstroke. On the ostrich, that keel is shrunk to a sad little ridge, or basically gone. No keel, no room for those massive pectoral engines, which is fine because nobody's taking off from this runway. Up in the wings, the long arm and hand bones you expect in a flyer are shortened, fused, or just reduced to stiff paddles of bone. The joints lose their range of motion. The whole thing turns into more of a balancing stick or display fan than a pair of airfoils. Meanwhile, down below, the legs and pelvis are going full gym bro. See, in ostriches and emus, the thigh and drumstick muscles are huge. Most of the meat you'd see on a roast bird is actually those power legs. Long tendons run down to the toes like built-in springs, storing and releasing energy with every stride. The pelvis is broader, the leg bones are thicker, and the center of mass has shifted forward and down, so the bird is basically a two-legged racing dinosaur instead of a launch platform. And yes, these guys are all real. Emus hit over 45 kilometers an hour. Ostriches can sprint faster than your car in a school zone. They haven't just lost flight, they've traded it for high-speed ground mode. But this isn't only a giant bird thing. On little islands, rails that used to fly in from the mainland quietly do the same remodel on a smaller scale. Their keels get shallower, their wings proportionally shorter and rounder, their leg bones subtly beefed up for walking and sprinting through cold, tangled undergrowth instead of staying light for long flights over open water. Once those skeletal blueprints get rewritten in the developmental program, you're basically locked in. To get flight back, evolution would have to regrow the keel, stretch the wings, rewire the muscles, shift the center of mass, the whole package. So, losing flight isn't just a bad habit a bird could drop. It's a one-way door. Which raises the next question. If the body is getting this overhauled, what's happening to the wings themselves as they slowly stop being wings? So, if the whole skeleton is being remodeled, what's actually happening up in the blueprint room? Because birds don't wake up one day with tiny wings and gym bro legs. That stuff gets decided way back in the egg, when the body plan is still just a bunch of growing buds. Let's imagine you could zoom into a bird embryo in slow motion. At first, the wing and leg buds look almost identical. Same little blobs of tissue, same basic genes turning on to say, grow here. You might think flying versus walking would need a completely different genetic toolkit, but what you actually find is that it's mostly about timing and intensity. When, where, and how strongly growth genes fire. Not a new script, just a different director's cut. See, there are genes that tell a limb bud how long to keep growing, how fast bones should elongate, how big muscles should get. Studies on domestic chickens and weird natural mutants have shown that if you tweak those signals just a bit, you can get hilariously unbalanced birds. Short, stubby wings on a normal body, or legs that are way bigger and chunkier than they should be. Change the dial a little, and the proportions go wild. On islands, evolution loves playing with those dials. Imagine a rail landing on some predator-free rock in the middle of the ocean. Flying is expensive, and now mostly pointless. Any chick that grows wings just a bit shorter, or legs with slightly more muscle, saves energy and moves better on the ground. Not a huge change, just a tiny nudge in development. But stack that over thousands of generations, and you go from kind of bad at flying to the wings are basically decorative. And yes, these guys are all real. You see it in Kakapo with their barrel bodies and power thighs. In island rails that would rather sprint into a bush than take off. In penguins that turned their wings into underwater flippers. In each case, the same general trick. Shift the growth program so legs and body get the upgrade, and the wings slowly get demoted. Under the hood, some genes tied to flight muscles and feather structure even start to look bored. In several flightless birds, those genes show signs of relaxed selection or subtle functional changes. Once high-performance flight isn't life or death anymore, natural selection stops obsessively maintaining every tiny detail of those muscles or feathers. Mistakes creep in, and as long as the bird can still walk, run, or swim, evolution just shrugs. So, what you're really watching is a resource reallocation project. Less developmental budget poured into giant chest muscles and perfectly engineered wings. More into thick leg bones, dense muscles, and bodies tuned for walking, sprinting, or diving. But if evolution is shoveling energy away from the sky, where is all that saved power going instead? So, where does all that saved power go when birds stop paying sky rent? Let's imagine you follow it straight into the cold Southern Ocean and run face first into a tuxedo torpedo. Penguins are the poster children for flightless birds. You might think they're just sad little ex-seagulls that forgot how to take off. But what you actually find is way weirder. They didn't abandon flight. They relocated it. They moved their flying from the air into the water and turned the ocean itself into their sky. Watch a penguin underwater and your brain gets confused. Your eyes are telling you, fish. But your knowledge of physics is screaming, "That's a bird doing barrel rolls at 20 miles an hour." Their wings have been remodeled into stiff, flipper-like blades. The joints lock down so they don't flap like a gull anymore. They slice. The bones in those wings are dense, not hollow, acting like built-in ballast so they don't bob back up like a pool toy every time they dive. On land, they look like someone put a bird in a sleeping bag and told it to walk it off. In water, they're fighter jets. The whole body is streamlined into a torpedo. Thick chest, narrow tail, tiny head, all trading aerial lift for aquatic thrust. Airbirds use their wings to push against a thin, low-resistance gas. Penguins are doing the same thing against a medium that's 800 times denser, where drag is brutal, but the payoff for the right shape is huge. And from an evolutionary standpoint, that's the wild part. This is the world of repurposed hardware, not brand new inventions. The same basic motion patterns that let a gull flap into the sky are what let a penguin fly underwater. The same massive pectoral muscles that once powered takeoff now hammer those flippers back and forth like underwater wings. The blueprint didn't change species, just medium. Trade-offs, though? Brutal. Penguins cannot take off from land. They cannot explode out of the water and soar away from an orca. Once they're out of the ocean, gravity absolutely clowns them. But in their chosen environment, they're hyper-efficient. They can hit high speeds, twist, bank, and thread through ice chunks with the kind of precision that would be impossible if they still had big, flexible, draggy air wings. So losing aerial flight didn't strip them of a movement superpower, it doubled down on one. Evolution basically said, "You live in the water now, stop pretending you're a seagull," and poured everything into that. And yes, these guys are all real. Which raises a bigger question. If one bird lineage can turn into a swimming missile, what else has flightlessness been secretly upgrading in other species? So, if penguins turned their wings into underwater jet engines, what happens when evolution tries the opposite upgrade on land? Let's imagine you're not in some tiny island forest now, but standing in the middle of an open African savanna. No trees, no cliffs, just flat ground, hot air, and something huge staring back at you. It's an ostrich, basically a running dinosaur in a feather coat. And it's not alone in this club. You've got emus sprinting across Australia, rheas booking it through South America. You might think flightless birds only happen on cozy little islands with no predators, but what you actually find on big continents is a different experiment. Birds that ditched flying not because life was easy, but because speed and size were just better weapons. Look at an ostrich body and try not to think theropod. Long, insanely powerful legs with elastic tendons that work like biological pogo sticks, storing and releasing energy with every stride. Reduced toes, just 2 per foot, so less drag, more efficiency, like upgrading from a clunky hiking boot to a racing spike. The whole body leans forward, balanced over the hips, head out front, tail behind. The exact posture of a bipedal sprinter built to cover huge distances at highway speeds. And yes, these guys are all real. An ostrich can hit around 70 kilometers per hour and keep a serious pace without collapsing, because those legs are doing half the work for the muscles. Emus and rheas aren't quite as fast, but they're still way quicker than most of the predators sharing their habitats. This is the world of land birds that decided, why launch into the air when I can just outrun everything? See, in an open habitat like the savanna, being big and fast can actually be a better defense than flapping away. If you're an ostrich, you're too big for most predators to tackle cleanly, and you're too fast for them to catch if you see them coming. Flying is expensive. Staying light enough to take off means sacrificing armor, muscle, and fat. But if the ground is wide open and you can spot danger from a long way off, it makes more sense to pour all that energy into leg day. And the wings? They didn't just vanish. Well, they did shrink, but they're not useless decorations. Ostriches use their wings as dynamic stabilizers while running, like little feathered rudders that help them corner without wiping out. They flash them in courtship displays, turning into giant, flailing fans to impress mates. Parents shade their chicks with them, basically deploying built-in umbrellas in the middle of that brutal sun. So instead of wings or no wings, what you're really seeing is a total rebalancing of the bird body around the environment. On islands, flightlessness often shows up as small, chunky birds that never need to hurry. On continents, it can produce these towering, high-speed dinosaurs 2.0. Which raises a new question. If size and speed can make wings optional on land, what happens when you push bird bodies to the absolute giant extreme? So, when you push bird bodies to the absolute giant extreme, what do you get? You get ghosts. Huge, awkward, unforgettable ghosts that humans met, named, and then erased almost instantly. Let's imagine you sail up to Mauritius in the 1600s. You might think a remote tropical island would be full of colorful parrots flitting through the canopy, but what you actually find waddling down the beach toward you is a giant pigeon that forgot how to be a pigeon. The dodo. About a meter tall, heavy-bodied, with stubby wings that are basically ornaments and a walk cycle that screams, "I have never been chased in my life." The dodo was literally a ground-dwelling pigeon relative, descended from some perfectly normal flying bird that colonized this island when it still had to flap for its life. Then the island did its thing. No mammalian predators, no big snakes, no need for fast aerial getaways. Over generations, wings shrank, legs thickened, and the whole body got bigger, slower, and rounder because carrying extra fat was safer than wasting energy on flight. Fearless curiosity around new arrivals was a winning strategy when the scariest local threat was a crab. And then ships showed up. Rats, pigs, and hungry sailors walked straight into a bird world that had evolved in predator-free easy mode. The exact traits that made the dodo successful on Mauritius, being heavy, tame, and nest-on-the-ground confident, turned into a speedrun recipe for extinction. Within about a century of regular human contact, that entire lineage of weird island pigeons was gone. Now jump across the planet to New Zealand and crank the dial even higher. This is the world of the moa. Some species were turkey-sized, but the biggest ones, when they stretched their necks, they stood over 3 meters tall. That's you looking up at a bird browsing leaves where a giraffe would be, except New Zealand never had giraffes, or horses, or deer. So, evolution just built its own giant feathered browsers instead. Moas were herbivores with powerful legs, long necks, and no wings to speak of. Again, they came from flying ancestors that made it to a predator-free island, then slowly traded hollow-boned aerodynamics for mass, height, and a lifestyle that treated the forest like an all-you-can-eat salad bar. Aerial escape stopped being central. Being big enough that nothing bothered you was the better deal. And yes, these guys are all real. Or were. Because once humans and their dogs arrived, even 3-meter-tall birds went down fast. But here's the really cold part. The dodo and the moa are just the celebrities. Fossils say that, before us, islands all over the world were crowded with flightless birds we will never see alive again. So if evolution keeps making these grounded giants, and we keep deleting them the moment we show up, what does that say about the flightless birds that are still here right now? So, let's imagine you could rewind the planet a few tens of thousands of years, and then zoom out. You're looking at Earth from space. No cities, no ships, no runway lights. Just a dark ocean and a scatter of islands. You might think those islands are quiet, kind of empty, maybe a few seabirds circling overhead. But what you actually find, if you drop down onto the beaches and into the forests, is that the ground is crowded. This is the world of grounded birds. Biologists and paleontologists keep pulling bones out of caves, dunes, and sinkholes, and they all tell the same story. Flightless birds used to be everywhere. Not just a cute handful like ostriches and penguins, but a whole shadow roster of species that never made it into human memory. See, when researchers piece together fossils from islands all over the globe, a striking pattern pops out. Lineage after lineage of flying birds had done the same weird thing. They landed on an island with no big predators, put their wings on the evolutionary chopping block, and stayed. Rails, ducks, parrots, pigeons, owls, songbirds. Flight was lost well over 100 separate times. It wasn't a rare accident. It was a habit. And yes, these guys are all real. You already know the moas of New Zealand, but standing next to them in this mental zoo are the elephant birds of Madagascar, which were even bigger. Imagine a bird as tall as a basketball hoop, with eggs the size of a human head, stomping around subtropical forests like feathery hippos. Across the Pacific, whole chains of islands had their own flightless rails and ducks, some the size of chickens, some tiny, all of them apparently deciding that jogging was better than flying. Then it gets weirder. Many of these species are so obscure that we only know them from a few bones in a cave floor or a layer of sand. No name in local stories, no drawings, nothing. Just leg bones that are too thick, wings that are too small, and a paleontologist going, well, that one couldn't fly either. How many more never even fossilized? That's the part that actually hurts your brain a little. Let's imagine a visual to keep track. You're looking at a rotating globe, and every island where we've found extinct flightless birds lights up. New Zealand flares white hot. So does Madagascar. The Caribbean starts to sparkle. The Pacific turns into a galaxy of tiny glowing dots. By the time you're done, the map looks less like Earth and more like a constellation of failed, or rather, interrupted experiments in grounded evolution. And here's the really cold twist. Humans probably erased a huge fraction of all those lineages. We walked in late to the party, looked around at millions of years of repeated let's not fly experiments, and then knocked most of them off the board before anyone could take notes. So when we ask why birds keep losing flight, we're working from survivors and ghosts, trying to reverse engineer the rules from an archive that we, accidentally, shredded. Which means if we want answers, we have to squeeze a lot of information out of the few grounded birds that are still standing. So, if evolution shredded the archive, islands are the crime scene. And when humans finally show up, you're walking into a place where the birds have been rehearsing the wrong play for thousands of years. Let's imagine you step onto some remote Pacific island at dawn. You might think every bird would explode away from you in a panic of wings and noise, but what you actually find is nothing. A rail just stands there in the path, blinking at you like a confused chicken. A parrot waddles past your boots. Nobody is impressed. See, when you evolve in a world with no mammalian predators, run for your life is not a skill you really practice. These birds often have almost zero fear of big animals because the only big things they've ever seen are trees and waves. They nest on the ground, they stash their eggs under ferns, and their main defense is to freeze and trust their camouflage. That works great against a hawk that hunts by sight in daylight. It does not work great against a rat that hunts by smell in the dark. So when humans arrive, they don't just bring one new predator. They bring an entire predator package. You get people hunting adults, burning or chopping forests, trampling nesting sites. And then you get the stowaways, rats pouring off ships, cats and dogs following settlements, pigs rooting through the undergrowth like biological bulldozers. Eggs, chicks, sleeping adults, it's all just snacks with feathers. Traits that were once genius island hacks suddenly flip into death traps. Being big and slow meant you could store more fat for bad seasons. Now it just makes you a larger target. Being ground-based with reduced wings saved energy in a world where nothing chased you. Now you can't clear a fallen log fast enough to escape a dog. Staying still used to make you invisible. Now it just makes you an easy grab for something with whiskers and night vision. The dodo is the celebrity of this disaster. A giant ground-dwelling pigeon on Mauritius, no fear of humans, wings basically downgraded to decorations. Within about a century of human contact, it's gone. But the dodo wasn't some weird one-off. Island rails across the Pacific, giant moas in New Zealand, flightless ducks and geese on islands you've never heard of. And yes, these guys are all real, or were real, until they vanished, often before anyone wrote down more than a sailor's sketch. This is the world of slow, patient evolution colliding with fast, chaotic humans. It took millennia to sculpt legs, lungs, and brains to match a quiet, predator-free island. It took a few ship landings to break that world apart. So the same specialization that made these birds such perfect island survivors also made them incredibly fragile. And the question becomes, can any flightless birds adapt to us in time, or are we just watching the last experiments run out of road? So if so many of these experiments are slamming into a human-shaped wall, you might think evolution messed up. Like, if flight is such a superpower, doesn't every grounded bird look like a bad bet in hindsight? Did nature just whiff it 100 times in a row? Well, let's imagine you rewind the tape to before ships, guns, and house cats. For millions of years, those doomed lineages weren't limping along. They were absolutely running the place. Giant moas in New Zealand, elephant birds in Madagascar, rails on tiny Pacific specks of land. On their home turf, these birds weren't mistakes. They were the top of the food chain. They rode out ice ages, sea-level swings, storms that erased coastlines, and they still stuck around. See, evolution isn't sitting there doing 5,000-year risk assessments asking, what if hairless apes invent global shipping? It's very short-sighted in a very specific way. It optimizes for right now. Who survives? Who has kids? Who turns today's environment into tomorrow's genes? On a cold, quiet island with no mammal predators and no snakes, wings are expensive overkill. Heavy wing muscles, giant flight chest, light hollow bones. You're paying a huge energy bill for an escape plan you never use. So if you can drop flight, you can get bigger, store more fat, lay more eggs, and put that muscle into legs instead of wings. In that context, becoming flightless isn't a bug, it's the winning move. That's why rails keep doing it over and over. A flying rail colonizes a new, predator-free island. Its descendants slowly shrink their wings, beef up their legs, and, before long, you've got yet another secret: locally perfect, non-flying bird. And it's not just tiny island weirdos. Look at ostriches, emus, and rheas. These are global-scale success stories. They traded flight for long, springy legs, massive eyes, and, in the case of ostriches, a kick that can actually kill a lion. Penguins did the same kind of trade, but in water, they're terrible at air. But underwater, they fly with stiff flipper wings, dense bones, and torpedo bodies. Different worlds, same idea. Flightlessness can dominate whole continents and oceans when the rules line up. So, no, flightlessness isn't some evolutionary dead end by default. It's more like a high-commitment specialization. You cash in your emergency parachute for a body that's perfectly tuned to one particular game. It works brilliantly, until the rules get rewritten overnight by something like us. And the real question now is, what happens when evolution is forced to play that game on fast forward? So, if evolution can be forced onto fast forward, how fast are we actually talking? Like, how long does it take for a bird that owns the sky to become something that mostly just jogs around in the bushes, looking vaguely embarrassed about its wings? You might think this has to be a super slow, dinosaur skeleton kind of timeline. Millions of years, right? But what you actually find, especially on small, isolated islands, is that evolution can move at a pace that feels uncomfortably quick. When you've got tiny populations, strong, consistent pressures, and no big predators lurking around, natural selection doesn't politely stroll. It sprints. Let's imagine a rail, one of those small, secretive marsh birds that gets blown out to some remote Pacific island. At first, it's a perfectly decent flyer. But flying is expensive. You're burning huge amounts of energy just to stay in the air. On an island with no cats, no foxes, no giant raptors dropping in from above, every calorie wasted on flight is a bad investment. The birds that fly a little less, eat a little more, and survive a few extra storms? Those are the ones that leave more chicks. Genetic and fossil data from island birds suggest this shift shows up fast. We're talking major reductions in flight ability in maybe tens of thousands to a few 100,000 years. That's not instant on a human scale, but in evolutionary time, that's basically a panic speedrun. And the wild part is, the early stages don't look like some dramatic wings vanish overnight moment. They look subtle. First, you get behavior. Birds choose to fly less, run more, nest on the ground. Then anatomy starts to follow. Slightly shorter wings. A chest that's not quite so ripped because you don't need giant flight muscles if you're mostly just hopping. A body that drifts heavier, stockier, better at storing fat for cold nights or bad seasons. All of that can start stacking up long before a species is truly, anatomically flightless. See, when you zoom out to geological time, this is happening within just a few glacial cycles. While ice sheets crawl back and forth, entire lineages can go from strong, long-distance flyers to birds that can barely clear a bush. Your grandparents won't watch a gull turn into an ostrich in real time, but if you could replay the last couple 100,000 years on fast forward, you'd literally watch wings shrink and legs take over. And yes, these guys are all real. Island rails, the Kakapo, even some ducks that are halfway committed to this grounded lifestyle. The unsettling part is that some birds alive right now might be mid-transition, quietly flying a little less, getting a little heavier, edging toward a future where the sky is no longer theirs. The question is, can we spot flightlessness in progress before something, like us, slams the brakes on that story again? So, if some birds are inching toward a grounded future, what does that actually look like in real time? You might think it's a dramatic moment where a species wakes up one morning and just forgets how to fly. But what you actually find is way messier, and honestly, way more interesting. Let's imagine a bird that can fly, but really doesn't want to. You chase it, and instead of launching into the sky like a respectable bird, it bolts into the bushes, sprints on those legs, maybe throws in a panicked wing flutter that gets it about 3 meters and one existential crisis down the path. This is the world of reluctant flyers, island rails, chunky ducks, and some galliforms like island pheasants and quails that are basically chickens with commitment issues. These birds are technically still airborne capable, but their whole lifestyle is already on the ground. They forage in the leaf litter. They nest on the ground. They freeze or run when scared instead of taking off. When you look closely, their bodies are quietly following that behavior. Wings start to look a bit too small for the weight they're carrying. The chest muscles that power strong flight shrink relative to the rest of the body. Legs get thicker, heavier, better for sprinting than soaring. Take the weka in New Zealand. It has wings. It can flutter. But most of the time it acts like a curious, slightly unhinged forest chicken, trotting around campsites, stealing food, not doing much sky. Some Pacific Island rails are even further along. They can flap themselves up onto a low branch or across a gap. But sustained flight? Hard pass. They live as if they're already flightless, only cashing in that last bit of lift as an emergency button. And yes, these guys are all real. To an evolutionary biologist, they're basically living time-lapse videos. By comparing their bones, muscles, and genomes to close relatives that still fly well, scientists can ask, which parts of birdness start to unravel first when flight stops being essential? Is it the wing bones shrinking? The genes for big pectoral muscles dialing down? The brain areas for aerial maneuvering getting less investment? Pattern interrupt. You might expect behavior to change last after the body does, but in a lot of these half-committed species, the behavior has already jumped ship. They act flightless long before their anatomy fully catches up, which suggests natural selection is easing off on flight performance while heavily favoring anything that makes ground life cheaper and safer. So these reluctant flyers are like open experiments evolution is still running. Not fully grounded, not fully airborne, just testing the waters of a flightless future, if their islands stay quiet and predator-free long enough. The twist is that if has become a lot more fragile now that we're in the picture. And once you start looking for those half-committed birds, you notice something weird. Even the ones that have gone all in on being grounded still drag around wings. Ostriches with those dramatic feather fans. Kiwis with arms so tiny they're basically a rumor. Kakapo with little tucked-away stubs. If flight is gone, why didn't evolution just hit delete? You might think the cleanest move would be to get rid of wings entirely. No more fragile bones, no more useless feathers, just pure leg day. But what you actually find is that evolution almost never fully erases a limb. It edits. It shrinks. It repurposes. Because taking a complex structure to absolute zero is risky. You're not just removing surface fluff, you're pulling on deep developmental wiring that runs through the whole body. Let's imagine you're an ostrich sprinting across a hot, open savanna at almost highway speeds. Your wings are way too small to lift your giant body, sure, but watch what they're doing. They're acting like little air brakes and steering fins, flaring out on turns, helping you balance so you don't faceplant at 70 kilometers an hour. On top of that, they're flags for courtship, shade for chicks, and surprisingly decent sunshades for you. Not bad for leftover parts. Now drop into cold water with a penguin. Technically, penguins are flightless, but only if you're obsessed with air. Those wings have been hammered into dense, stiff flippers that let them fly underwater, where drag is bigger, pressure is huge, and speed still matters. Same basic limb, totally different world. This is the world of evolutionary recycling. When a wing stops being a wing and starts being a propeller. See, wings aren't just bolted onto the outside. They're the endpoint of genetic programs that tell vertebrate embryos how to grow front limbs at all. If you try to erase that program completely, you risk collateral damage to muscles, nerves, even the chest and shoulder skeleton. It's usually way cheaper, genetically speaking, to dial the volume down than to rip out the speakers. So you get kiwi wings hidden under fluff, not no wings at all. And even tiny wings can still do work. They help with display, with insulation, with turning quickly in dense forest or scrub. A kakapo scrambling through New Zealand vegetation can flare its little wings to stabilize jumps and landings, even if it will never get true lift. For a bird, useless is a much higher bar than can't fly anymore. So when we talk about birds losing flight, what we're really watching is radical redesign. The wing doesn't vanish, it gets reassigned. From lift to balance, from soaring to swimming, from flapping to flirting. And that sets up a bigger question. If wings can be bent this far without breaking, what does it actually take to push a bird all the way into full, permanent flightlessness? So to answer that, you have to open up a bird's energy budget, like you're looking at the world's tiniest, most chaotic spreadsheet. Every calorie that goes in has to pay for something. Staying warm, repairing tissues, growing feathers, powering the brain, making eggs, and then, on top of all that, flight. And flight is stupidly expensive. You might think running is hard work, but what you actually find is that flapping through the air can burn several times more energy per second than walking or swimming the same distance. A hummingbird is basically a flying furnace. It has to drink its own body weight in nectar in a day just to not die in the middle of the night. That's the sports car lifestyle. High performance, high fuel burn, constant refills. Let's imagine two birds with the same food supply. One flies, one doesn't. The flying bird has giant chest muscles, oversized heart and lungs, turbocharged metabolism, and it has to keep everything lightweight. Fat is bad. Bulk is bad. Extra eggs are bad, because all of that makes flying harder. It's like loading bricks into a race car. Sure, you can do it, but the whole point of the design is speed, not cargo. Now take away the need to fly. No predators, no long migrations, food mostly close by. Suddenly, evolution is looking at that massive fuel-hungry engine and going, why are we still paying for this? Over generations, the flight muscles can shrink, the metabolism can cool down, and those calories get reallocated. Same income, totally different spending priorities. See, a flightless island bird is more like a sturdy truck. It's slower, heavier, and not winning any aerial races, but it can carry more. Bigger body, thicker bones, more room for fat. That extra fat is not just laziness, it's a survival account. When storms hit or seasons swing and food gets scarce, a chunky kakapo or a rail with good reserves can coast through the bad weeks, while a tiny, high-strung flyer would just crash. And that bigger frame doesn't just store fuel. It can also turn energy into reproduction. Larger birds can often produce larger eggs with bigger yolks, or more eggs per season, which means chicks hatch with more built-in snacks and a better chance of surviving their first cold, hungry nights. In a stable, predator-free system, that's huge. You're not racing away from danger, you're outbreeding bad luck. So when you stop paying the flight tax, evolution starts investing in traits that pay off on the ground. Muscles for digging, legs for sprinting, guts for weird island diets, and baby output. And yes, these guys are all real. But if this energy math makes giving up flight sound like a great deal, why doesn't every bird do it the moment it lands somewhere nice and quiet? You might think once a bird ditches flight, the story is all bones and feathers. Lighter wings, heavier legs, roll credits. But what you actually find is way stranger. Evolution starts quietly rewriting the bird's entire psychology. Let's imagine you're not a falcon slicing through the sky, but a kakapo waddling through cold New Zealand forest at night. If you can fly, your brain is basically running a 3D escape simulator 24/7. You're scanning the air, calculating angles, wind, distance to the next branch, and where that hawk might come from. Your map of the world is layered: ground, canopy, open sky. Survival is all about vertical options. Take the wings away, and that whole mental game flips. Now your threats don't drop from above, they appear around corners. So your attention sinks to the ground. You care about tunnels in the grass, gaps under roots, the quickest route to that burrow you dug last week. Instead of memorizing thermals and safe takeoff points, you're building a detailed street map of logs, rocks, and hidey holes. Same forest, totally different video game. And on islands with few big predators, something even riskier happens. Fear gets dialed down. A lot. Rails on tiny Pacific islands, or the dodo's ancestors on Mauritius, evolved in worlds where the biggest danger was basically, don't fall off a cliff. Large animals just didn't do much to them. So birds that wasted less time panicking and more time feeding or breeding actually did better. Calm, slightly clueless birds won. That worked great. Right up until humans showed up with dogs, rats, and a talent for throwing rocks. Suddenly, that relaxed, ground-focused psychology turned into a disaster. You walk right up to the huge new mammal because it doesn't match anything in your brain's old threat library. You don't bolt. You don't fly. You just investigate. And you can guess how that ends. See, the brain is expensive tissue. If you're not threading through branches at speed, you don't need the same level of complex 3D spatial processing. So some flightless birds seem to shift those cognitive resources. Less air traffic control, more ground logistics. Remember every safe path between feeding spots, every burrow entrance, every spot where you once survived a scare. It's not dumber, it's just optimized for a flatter world. And then there's the social software. Kakapo males don't soar around looking flashy. They carve out ground arenas called leks, dig shallow bowls, and spend the night making low, booming calls that can travel for kilometers. No aerial chase, no mid-air acrobatics, just subwoofer parrot on the forest floor. This is the world of birds that are fully committed to the ground life. So when a bird loses flight, its body changes, but its instincts, fears, and even love life get patched too. Which raises a creepy question. What happens when that carefully tuned ground brain suddenly meets a brand new kind of predator it has never seen before? So now imagine that same clueless, ground-tuned bird brain. But instead of meeting a new land predator, it waddles straight into the ocean. You might think water would be the last place a bird escapes to if it can't fly. But what you actually find is a whole squad of birds that looked at the sky, shrugged, and said, "I'm good. I'll take the sea." Meet the Galapagos flightless cormorant. At first glance, it looks like a normal cormorant that someone rendered on low graphics settings. Stubby, ragged-looking wings that hang like wet sleeves, feathers that don't really repel water, and a body that just seems heavier. If you tried to toss this bird into the air, it would drop like a rock. But the moment it slips underwater, it turns into a torpedo. See, around the rocky Galapagos coasts, you don't have a lot of fast, mammal-style sea predators patrolling the shallows. No cold, sleek sea lions everywhere. No giant sharks hugging the shore. What you do have is a buffet of fish and invertebrates just off the coast. So if you're a cormorant here, you don't need to waste energy on long-distance flight. You need to dive. Deep, fast, and often. Over time, selection basically traded in this bird's frequent flyer miles for a gym membership. Wings shrank until they were useless for lift, but perfect as underwater paddles. Body mass went up, which sounds bad for flying but is great when you're trying not to bob back to the surface like a feathered beach ball. Powerful legs and big webbed feet took over as the main engines, kicking it through the water while the mini wings steer and add thrust. And yes, these guys are all real. The cormorant is just one dramatic stop on a whole continuum of almost flightless water birds. Think of grebes and loons. In the air, many of them can still fly, but barely, like they're on economy mode. On land, they walk like they're wearing ski boots. Put them underwater, though, and they suddenly move with this smooth, eerie grace, chasing fish with tight turns and fast bursts that most flying birds could never pull off. Let's imagine you follow one down. Under the surface, the rules change. Water is thick and draggy compared to air, but it also lets you push against it. These birds use their wings and feet in perfectly timed strokes, literally flying through water, carving out lift and thrust from a medium that wants to slow them down. Loons flap their wings underwater like slow-motion oars while their feet kick in sync, a full-body swimming algorithm. So, evolution isn't out here protecting flight as some sacred upgrade. It's just optimizing movement. If the important world is in the air, you get swifts and albatrosses. If the important world is under the waves, you get cormorants, grebes, and loons drifting toward the penguin side of the spectrum. Which raises a bigger question. What happens when birds go all in on the ocean and never come back to the sky at all? So, if some birds trade wings for flippers and become penguin torpedoes, what happens when they don't go into the ocean at all, but still abandon the sky? Let's imagine you're walking through a cold, damp New Zealand forest at night, shining a flashlight, expecting an owl or something vaguely bird-shaped. You might think you'll see wings, feathers, maybe glowing eyes in a tree. But what you actually find snuffling around your boots looks suspiciously like a tiny, confused mammal in a feather coat. This is a kiwi. It's a bird that apparently read the bird instruction manual and decided, no thanks. Tiny, hidden wings. No tail. Whisker-like feathers on its face. A long beak with nostrils at the tip, like someone stretched a mouse and forgot to stop. And yes, these guys are all real. In pre-human New Zealand, there were basically no native land mammals running around the forest floor. No foxes, no badgers, no rodents in the undergrowth. So evolution looked at this wide-open mammal-shaped job posting and just shoved a bird into it. Kiwis slid into the role that small nocturnal mammals fill almost everywhere else, creeping through leaf litter at night, probing for insects, worms, and fallen fruit, and hiding out in burrows during the day. See, once flight wasn't the main thing keeping them alive, their whole body started to drift away from the standard bird template. Flying birds need hollow, lightweight bones. Kiwis went, cool story, and let their bones get denser and heavier because they weren't going airborne anyway. Their legs got thick and powerful, perfect for digging burrows and stomping through dense undergrowth instead of perching on branches. Their senses rewired too. Most birds are visual hunters. Kiwis live in the dark, so their eyesight is terrible, but their sense of smell is one of the best of any bird, and those whisker feathers help them feel their way through the night like a cat's whiskers. The nostrils at the very tip of the beak let them literally smell food underground before they dig it up. This is the world of a bird that's basically pretending to be a shrew. And then there's the egg situation. Kiwis lay eggs that are absurdly huge compared to their body size, up to a quarter of the female's weight. You might think that sounds uncomfortable, and, well, it is. But because they're not trying to stay light enough to fly, they can afford to invest a giant amount of energy into a few super-developed chicks instead of many tiny ones. Put it all together, and you get a creature that started as a normal flying bird and ended up functionally mammal-like. So if losing flight can turn a bird into a fake mammal, what else can it do when the environment gets weird? So if losing flight can turn a bird into a fake mammal, what happens when completely different birds all hit the same weird island conditions at once? Let's imagine you line them up: a chunky flightless rail, a kakapo, and a reconstructed dodo, all side by side on screen. You might think you're looking at three close cousins. Same basic blueprint, right? Big round body, thick drumstick legs, wings that look like somebody forgot to finish them. But what you actually find is way stranger. These birds come from totally different branches of the bird family tree. Rails are closer to cranes, kakapo are parrots, and the dodo was basically a very confused pigeon that rage quit flying. See, when evolution drops these lineages onto predator-free, resource-rich islands, it keeps solving the same problem the same way. Food is everywhere. Nothing is trying to eat you. The climate is pretty mild compared to a cold mainland winter, and suddenly being a tiny, high-strung flyer is not the winning strategy anymore. Bigger bodies let you eat more types of food, store more fat, and survive bad seasons. Strong legs turn you into a walking tank that can dig, climb, and bulldoze through undergrowth. And the wings? Those become dead weight. Literally. Supporting lift is one of the most energy-hungry things a body can do. So once you stop needing to haul yourself into the air, selection just stops paying the wing bills. Bones shrink, flight muscles wither, feathers get shorter and fluffier, and you end up with these stubby, almost comedic limbs that are great for balance displays or braking during a fall, but not much else. Early naturalists got completely fooled by this. They'd show up on some island, see a dodo-shaped thing, then a kakapo-shaped thing, and go, "Ah yes, the noble tribe of dumpy ground birds." For a long time, people actually grouped a bunch of flightless species together just because they all looked like feathered bowling balls with legs. It took modern genetics to reveal that this was convergence, not family resemblance, and that evolution had basically been copy-pasting the same island ground bird template onto wildly different ancestors. And it's not just the body shape converging. Behavior falls into line too. Ground nesting shows up again and again because why waste energy in trees when nothing is hunting your eggs? Nocturnality evolves in parrots like the kakapo and in some rails, turning them into night-waddling seed vacuums. Reduced fear is almost guaranteed. When you haven't seen a mammal predator for a million years, you just walk up to new things like, oh cool, enrichment. This is the world of the island ground bird. Heavy, slow, bold, and weirdly similar no matter which lineage you start with. And when evolution keeps independently sculpting almost the same creature over and over, that's a pretty loud signal that the underlying ecological pressures are not random at all. So, if these pressures are that strong, what happens when you suddenly flip them by dropping a new kind of predator into the mix? So, you flip those pressures. You drop in a new kind of predator. What happens? Well, to see why that matters, you have to zoom out and ask a bigger question. If losing flight can be such a good deal on islands, why aren't the continents just crawling with chunky, ground-bound birds in every forest and grassland? You might think that once evolution discovers the walk, don't fly lifestyle, it would spam that upgrade everywhere. But what you actually find on continents is the opposite. Flightless birds are rare, patchy, and usually kind of extreme. Because the rules on big land masses are completely different from the cozy island tutorial level you just watched. Let's imagine you're a small bird in a continental jungle. You're not just worried about one lazy island hawk. You've got foxes, jackals, big cats, monitor lizards, snakes, maybe even crocodiles, all hunting in different ways at different times of day. Predator diversity is huge, and a lot of them are fast, agile mammals and reptiles that can sprint, climb, or ambush before you even hear them. In that world, wings are not optional fashion accessories. Rapid vertical escape is your panic button. If you can burst straight up into a tree or shoot over a river in 3 wing beats, you suddenly live longer than the bird that has to zigzag on the ground and hope its legs are having a good day. And it's not just about staying alive. It's about getting food first. On continents, competition is brutal. You're sharing insects, seeds, and fruit with rodents, monkeys, lizards, and a whole swarm of other birds. If you can fly, you can cover a huge area, hop between habitat patches when one dries out, and raid that fruiting tree 10 kilometers away before the mammals even smell it. Drop flight, and you give up all of that. So the only continental birds that actually get away with it tend to be weird. Think ostriches, emus, rheas, cassowaries. They didn't just stop flying and call it a day. Evolution basically said, okay, no wings? Then you're getting giant legs, top-tier sprint speed, and maybe a built-in dinosaur cosplay. An ostrich can outrun most predators on open ground. A cassowary is basically a walking dagger with feathers. They compensate for losing that vertical escape route with size, speed, armor, or all 3. And yes, these guys are all real. You don't see many dainty, flightless songbirds trying that stunt on continents because they'd just become snack-sized experiments. See, islands are special precisely because they turn all those dials down. Fewer big predators, less intense competition, more stable little pockets of habitat. That relaxes the usual continental rules that scream, stay airborne or die. And it opens this brief evolutionary window where wings can shrink without everything immediately regretting it. But that window doesn't stay open forever, especially once one particular predator shows up carrying boats, fire, and a very different kind of extinction speedrun. So once humans crash the party, the window slams shut. But before we bring in rifles and rats, you need to see how the environment itself has been quietly nudging birds back toward the ground long before we showed up. You might think the rule is simple. No predators, wings vanish. But what you actually find is this messy 3-way tug-of-war between climate, habitat, and food that decides whether flight stays worth the ridiculous energy bill. Let's imagine you're a small bird on a tropical island where the weather is basically nice all year. No cold winters, no ice, no giant seasonal food crash. Seeds, fruits, insects, always around. One of the main reasons birds in temperate regions need to stay in top flying shape is migration, that huge annual sprint between summer buffet and winter survival mode. If your island just doesn't do seasons, that whole reason evaporates. Now you don't need a high-performance, long-distance flight engine. You need to hop between trees, waddle to the next fruiting shrub, maybe scramble up a slope, and suddenly, shorter wings and a lower gear metabolism start looking pretty good because you're not burning jet fuel to cross oceans anymore. But climate is only part of it. The shape of the habitat matters just as much. Open skies over a giant continent reward big wings that can glide for miles. Dense forest, scrubby thickets, or tangled coastal bush. That's an obstacle course. Long, broad wings just slam into branches. This is the world of tight turns, vertical jumps, and quick dashes through gaps. See, in those cramped spaces, strong legs and a low center of gravity beat huge wings every time. Rails sneaking through marshes, the Kakapo clambering up New Zealand trees like a feathery rock climber, even some island pigeons that mostly run instead of fly. They're all playing this game where short hops and climbing muscles matter more than cruising altitude. Food layers, another rule on top. In nutrient-poor systems, where resources are scattered and unpredictable, being able to cover a huge area fast is still gold. Albatrosses soaring over empty oceans, or small passerines in dry scrub, keep their wings because walking that distance would be a death sentence. But shrink the world down to a compact, resource-rich island, with fruiting trees every few dozen meters, and insects in every leaf pile, and the math flips. Why pay for a sports car when a pair of good hiking boots gets you everything you need? Well, combine all three: low predators, stable mild climate, and a small, cluttered habitat with food close by, and evolution starts quietly stacking the deck. Each generation shaves a little cost off the flight system, bulks up the legs, slows the metabolism. No dramatic jump. Just a long, slow push away from the sky, until something suddenly changes the rules again, like a new predator that doesn't care how dense your forest is because it brings its own tools. So, if new predators with fancy tools can slam the brakes on losing flight, what happens when the new predator is us and we also bring food? Are we, accidentally, building a world where some birds quietly start training for a low-flight lifestyle? You might think the answer is no. Cities feel dangerous, loud, full of glass and cars and cats. Not exactly a paradise for giving up escape velocity. But what you actually find is weirdly familiar. Patches of habitat where food is abundant, predictable, and sitting right on the ground, while many of the old predators are gone or heavily reduced. Let's imagine a city square at dawn. Pigeons everywhere, waddling between coffee cups, barely bothering to hop out of your way. These are rock doves, built by evolution to nest on cliffs and fly long distances. Yet here, most flights are short hops from ledge to sidewalk to statue, because the buffet line is permanently open at street level. See, when flying is the most expensive way to move, any bird that can get away with flying less suddenly has options. If your food is spilled fries and bread, you don't need a giant migration. You need good timing and nerves of steel around traffic. So city pigeons spend more time on the ground, pack into dense flocks, and rely on quick dashes and short bursts instead of long, efficient cruising. They're not alone. Some urban crows and ravens are doing a similar thing. These super-smart corvids raid trash, crack nuts on roads, and commute between parking lots instead of mountain valleys. They still have strong wings, but the selection pressures are different now. Brains for problem-solving, tolerance of humans, maybe heavier bodies that stash more fat for winter, because you can always launch from a lamppost if you really need to. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of human-built islands, cities, landfills, giant agricultural fields. Places where we've stripped out many native predators, flattened the landscape, and installed 24/7 food dispensers in the form of crops, dumpsters, and bird feeders. On actual islands, it gets stranger. Some endangered birds now live under constant conservation babysitting. Predators removed, nest sites fenced, food supplemented when times get bad. A rail or duck that used to need strong flight to dodge hawks or cross rough water may now survive just fine by running, hiding, and trusting the fence line. Are these birds about to turn into new dodos next Tuesday? No. These are early, subtle shifts, not instant flightless monsters. But evolution never clocks out. Every generation is a tiny vote on what bodies work best in the worlds we've built. The scary part is, we're changing those worlds faster than ever. So what happens when the environment whiplashes again, and the traits we've been quietly rewarding suddenly become deadly? So you might think, fine, we grounded some birds. No big deal. The climate flips again, predators come back, and evolution just turns the flight setting back on, right? Like hitting restore to factory default on a parrot. But what you actually find is that flight is a one-way door. Once a lineage walks through it, coming back is almost impossible. Let's imagine you're an ancestor rail landing on a quiet, predator-free island. At first, you can fly. You've got a deep keel on your breastbone for huge flight muscles, hollow bones, a supercharged respiratory system, a brain wired for balance and aerial control. Flight isn't one trait. It's an entire engineering package that has to work together inside tight physical limits. Those wings only lift you because everything else is tuned to the same job. The feathers have to be the right shape and stiffness. The shoulder joint has to swing in a particular arc. The lungs and air sacs have to push insane amounts of oxygen. Even your nerves are firing in millisecond perfect patterns to keep you from stalling and face-planting into a tree. Now predators vanish, food is mostly on the ground, and flying is just expensive cardio. Selection starts voting for birds that save energy. The keel shrinks. Wing bones get shorter and thicker. Leg muscles bulk up. The whole skeleton shifts from lightweight airplane to walking tank. Genes that used to be under brutal pressure to stay perfect suddenly relax, and tiny mutations start quietly scrambling the old flight hardware. See, losing flight is easy because you can chip away at any part of that system and still have a bird that walks, runs, nests, and eats. Regaining flight means rebuilding the whole coordinated package at once, under real-world physics. That's like taking a bus, slowly turning it into a sports car by random tweaks, then expecting it to fly again without ever crashing in the meantime. And yes, these guys are all real. Rails that forget how to fly on island after island, the Kakapo trading wings for fat reserves and tree-climbing legs, penguins turning their wings into underwater flippers with dense bones that would be terrible in the air. Once those parts are repurposed, they're not sitting in storage waiting to be reinstalled. You might point at gliding lizards or flying squirrels and say, but they evolved flight again. Well, that's the thing. Limited gliding can pop up from scratch with a few skin flaps or feather tweaks. Full-powered flight, at bird level, has never clearly re-evolved in a bird lineage that went totally flightless. So when evolution pushes a bird through that one-way door, it's locking in a grounded future. Whatever storms, predators, or human disasters roll in next, those wings are not coming back. Which raises a darker question. What happens when we slam that door on entire ecosystems at once? So if we can't reopen that evolutionary door, how do we even know when birds walked through it in the first place? You can't exactly rewind time and watch a moa slowly forget how to fly. Instead, scientists do this CSI thing on deep time, stitching together clues from bones, DNA, and even ancient shorelines. You might think you just grab a fossil, see tiny wings, stamp it, flightless, and go home. But what you actually find is a whole messy spectrum between jet-powered sparrow and permanently grounded potato. Let's imagine you've got a stack of fossils from one bird lineage spread across a few million years. The first thing you look at is the skeleton. Flying birds keep a huge, blade-like keel on the breastbone for those giant flight muscles, long, lightweight wings, and relatively skinny legs. As flight starts to fail, that keel shrinks, the shoulder joint changes angle, wing bones get shorter and chunkier, and the legs turn into serious tree trunks. See, You can literally line up species from probably still flying, but badly, to this thing is not leaving the ground unless it's thrown. Subfossils from caves and old dunes are like the deluxe version of this. In places like Pacific Islands or New Zealand, you sometimes find multiple closely related forms stacked in the same region. Slightly bigger bodies, slightly shorter wings, slightly more robust legs, layer after layer. And yes, these guys are all real. It's like watching a time-lapse of a rail or a duck gradually bulking up and dropping altitude as the environment around them shifts from cold, stormy coasts to safer forests or predator-free grasslands. But bones only tell you what changed, not exactly when. So, scientists pull in genetics from living birds. By comparing DNA, they build family trees and estimate when different lineages split. If a modern flightless rail's genes say it diverged from its flying cousin 800,000 years ago, that's your rough timestamp for when wings started losing their day job. Now stack on one more layer, the planet itself. Well, islands don't just pop into existence at random. They rise from volcanoes, grow, erode, and drown as sea levels rise and fall. By overlaying fossil ages and DNA divergence times with maps of island formation and past sea levels, you can sometimes match the moment a flying ancestor colonized a new island, the period it got isolated, and the window where flight loss kicked in. Occasionally, it lines up almost too perfectly. Island appears, predators absent, birds arrive, wings start shrinking. Which leads to a much sharper question. What exactly is it about those new worlds that keeps pushing wings toward failure, again and again? So, if islands keep turning good flyers into walkers, you might think the story is simple. Wings on, wings off. But what you actually find is a lot messier, because some birds are technically flying. In the same way, you're technically exercising when you walk to the fridge. Let's imagine you're in a hot, swampy river in the Amazon, and a bird flaps past you like a slow, leafy chicken that forgot how aerodynamics works. That's the Hoatzin. It smells weird, eats leaves, and looks like a punk rock pheasant that lost a bet. And yes, these guys are all real. The Hoatzin does something almost no other bird dares to try. It ferments its food in a huge, front-loaded gut, kind of like a cow. All that plant mush sits in a muscular chamber in its chest, bubbling away. Great for squeezing calories out of tough leaves. Terrible for flying. You've basically taken a normal bird and strapped a sloshing compost tank to its sternum. Adults can fly, but only just. Short, noisy bursts. Awkward glides. They mostly hop from branch to branch over the water, like they're trying very hard not to admit that flying is exhausting. If you built a blueprint for future maybe flightless swamp bird, it would look suspiciously like this. But the real plot twist is the chicks. Hoatzin babies hatch with literal claws on their wings. When a predator shows up, they don't try to outfly it. They dive into the water, swim away, then climb back up the branches using those clawed wings like tiny prehistoric grappling hooks. This is the world of birds that technically fly, but also kind of don't trust the process. See, evolution here is juggling a cold set of trade-offs. The big gut that powers a leafy diet makes the bird heavier and less aerodynamic. The chicks solve danger by climbing and swimming instead of taking off. You're watching a lifestyle that leans hard on everything except efficient flight, without quite stepping over the line into full flightlessness. And the Hoatzin isn't alone in this weird middle ground. Over in Australasia, you get megapodes, nervous, chicken-like birds that can absolutely fly, but would really prefer not to. They sprint through the undergrowth, then build huge incubator mounds out of rotting vegetation, or even park their eggs on warm volcanic soil, outsourcing the whole sitting on eggs thing to compost and geology. They're capable flyers, but their bodies and behavior are already biased toward the ground. Strong legs, big feet. A life built around digging, running, and temperature managing a giant dirt pile. Are Hoatzins and megapodes destined to become the next kiwis or ostriches? Probably not. Predators, environments, and human pressure keep yanking them in different directions, but they show you how close some birds already skate to the limits of what their bodies can support in the air. The line between flying and flightless isn't a cliff. It's a long, muddy slope, full of birds sliding around in the middle. So, what happens when that slope tilts even harder? When new pressures shove already marginal flyers over the edge? So, let's imagine you tilt that slope all the way. Not just more predators or fewer. You erase the whole problem. One day, humans and our cats and rats and pigs just vanish. No ships, no cities, no traps, no lights. The world goes quiet, and evolution finally gets to clean up the mess. You might think that without us, birds would explode into some kind of permanent air force. Sky absolutely packed. Flight. Everywhere. Forever. But what you actually find, if you fast forward a few million years, is weirdly familiar. On a lot of islands, wings start shrinking. Again, see, once our introduced mammals die out or get slowly outcompeted, islands go back to their old settings. Few or no big land predators, pretty stable climates, compact habitats where you can cross the whole world in an afternoon walk. In that kind of calm, being a nervous, high metabolism, always ready to launch flyer is actually overkill. You're burning jet fuel to commute across a parking lot. Rails, parrots, pigeons, maybe even some songbirds would keep doing what they've done for tens of millions of years. Arrive on the wing, settle in, and then stop paying for flight they barely use. Wings get a little shorter. Flight muscles get a little smaller. Legs get thicker. Generations later, you've got new, chunky ground birds patrolling the leaf litter like the ghost of the dodo with better posture. And yes, these guys are all real in the fossil record already, just with different names. Moa, elephant birds, the whole lost lineup. A post-human world doesn't invent a brand new trick. It just hits replay on an old favorite. New Zealand without stoats looks a lot like old New Zealand. Pacific Islands without rats look like the rail playgrounds they used to be. On big continents, things get stranger. With farms and highways gone, huge open habitats spread again. Grasslands, savannas, cold steppes. In those spaces, large, fast-running birds could really lean in. Think ostriches, emus, rheas, but weirder. Maybe mid-sized hawks that mostly sprint down prey. Maybe ground-living game birds that are basically feathered antelopes, keeping their wings mostly as balance poles and emergency boosters. Meanwhile, in dense forests and wetlands, if big mammal predators thin out, some lineages might quietly slide toward the ground. Not full penguin mode, just less aerial panic. Shorter, rounder wings for short hops, stronger legs for climbing, wading, and sprinting. If you don't have to outclimb a cat, you can afford to be a little lazier in the air. Well, this is the world of evolutionary bookkeeping. Flight is always expensive, and whenever the bill stops being worth it, evolution starts cutting corners. With or without us, the same pressures keep reshaping the same bodies in the same ways. Flightlessness isn't some one-time historical accident tied to humans showing up. It's a deep, recurring response to calm, compact, low-danger worlds. So, if you removed us from the story, wings wouldn't just keep growing. In a lot of places, they'd quietly start melting away again. So, if wings keep melting away in the same kinds of places, you can actually boil this whole messy story down to one deep rule. Remove the things that make flying worth the pain, and flight just stops paying rent. You might think of flight as a permanent superpower, but what you actually find is a super expensive subscription that evolution cancels the second nobody's using it. Let's imagine you're a rail landing on a quiet Pacific island. No mammal predators. No snakes. The biggest danger is maybe a cranky gull or two. Food is stable and predictable. Seeds, insects, little crabs, all right there on the ground. You don't need to cross giant oceans anymore. You don't need to dodge hawks every 10 seconds, and walking works perfectly fine. In that world, every calorie you spend staying airborne is just wasted drama. See, flight isn't just flapping some feathers. It's hollow bones that snap more easily, chest muscles that guzzle oxygen, turbocharged hearts, and a whole lightweight body plan built around staying in the air. That's amazing if predators are fast and everywhere, if food is patchy, or if you have to migrate across half the planet. But if predator density drops, food becomes reliable, and long-distance travel stops mattering, those same upgrades turn into dead weight. Under those calm conditions, evolution starts rewarding a different kind of bird. Heavier, with thicker bones. Shorter wings that don't get in the way in dense forest or scrub. Bigger legs that can sprint, climb, or swim. More fat reserves to ride out cold nights or bad seasons. Specialized behaviors that only make sense when you're grounded. Burrowing like the Kakapo, diving like penguins, or sneaking through grass like island rails. And yes, these guys are all real. This is the world of convergent evolution, doing the same trick over and over. Rails on islands across the Atlantic and Pacific. Parrots in New Zealand. Pigeons like the dodo in the Indian Ocean. Ducks and cormorants on remote coasts. Different oceans, different time periods, totally different families, but they all slide toward the same solution once the rule kicks in. Low predators, steady food, short travel distances, and a habitat where walking or swimming is good enough. That's why flight has been lost well over 100 separate times in birds. It's not random. It's one of the clearest, if X, then Y patterns you get in any vertebrate group. Calm, compact, low-danger world? Wings shrink. Legs and bodies get bigger. The energy budget gets rewritten around staying put. But once you see that rule, you can't unsee the next problem. If you can dial flight off by removing predators, what happens when humans suddenly slam predators back into these worlds, plus a few extra threats we invented ourselves? So once humans crash the party, the old rule flips. All those calm, compact, low-danger worlds that told birds, yeah, you can stop flying now, suddenly turn into horror movies with cats, rats, pigs, and shotguns. And that's exactly why so many of the last flightless birds on Earth are in serious trouble. You might think the weirdos that gave up the sky would be rare but stable by now, tucked away on their little islands. But what you actually find is that a lot of them are clinging on by their claws. Kakapo in New Zealand, kiwis, secretive island rails, even some ducks that forgot how to fly. Many of them sit right at the top of endangered species lists because their entire lifestyle is built for a world that basically doesn't exist anymore. Let's imagine you're a kakapo. You're a chunky nocturnal parrot that climbs instead of flies, nests on the ground, and smells kind of nice if you're a predator with a good nose. That worked fine when your island had only birds and a few cold reptiles. Then humans show up with dogs, stoats, and habitat destruction. It's not just a bad match, It's like loading a stealth video game and realizing your character is permanently glowing. So, what do conservationists do when evolution has painted these birds into a corner? They start trying to rebuild the old rulebook. Predator-proof fences carve out safe pockets on big islands. Offshore islands get cleared of invasive mammals and turned into sanctuaries. Birds are moved, tagged, weighed, vaccinated, and yes, sometimes artificially inseminated. Nests are watched with cameras. Eggs are candled, incubated, even swapped between nests like a high-stakes shell game. And yes, these guys are all real. Kakapo actually have named human minders. Some rails live only behind fences that are basically Jurassic Park for birds. This is the world of conservation by life support, where we use technology and constant effort to simulate what used to come for free. No mammal predators, stable food, and room to stumble around without being eaten. See, when humans clear an island of rats,